Okay, now let's look at this question. Ada is in school, and it says this statement is also equivalent to P. And Obi is going to school, equivalent to Q. It is not raining, equivalent to R. Now, the question says, find P and R. Remember, this sign says and. Then find P or Q. We also have find the negation of P or the negation of Q. So the first step in solving this question is to identify the variables you are dealing with. So from this question, we have P, and we have Q, and we have R. Then you also look at the questions. You have P here, we have P, R, we have R, we have P, we have P, we have Q, and there's no other variable. So the first step is to identify the variables. Then the next thing to do is to get the truth table. So you draw the truth table representation for three inputs, P, Q, and R. So we have P, we have Q, and we have R. Now, remember, we said truth table, we make use of the words 8, 4, 2, 1. So we have three inputs, which means we are making use of 4, 2, 1. So we take 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then Q, we are taking them two at a time. So we have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then we have 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now remember the truth table, we start with T. Then you can drop right into solving the first question, which is P and R. But when solving questions like this, it's also good you use one table to solve the questions. Okay, P, Q, and R. So to solve the first question, which is P and R, P and R, P and R. Now, the law for AND says that the output is true only when the two inputs or the three inputs, or you can say all the inputs, are true. So the output is true when we have all the inputs to be true. Or we can also use the law of multiplication, because and, when you see and there, it's also saying multiplication. So we can make use of the law of multiplication, where T is equals to 1 and false is equals to 0. So we have, if we were to make use of that, P and R, which means we'll be using this row, this column, and this column. So P and T, P and R. So we have T and T. Remember, the outcome is true when we have the both inputs or all the inputs to be true. Or you can say if this is 1 and this is 1, using the law of multiplication, 1 multiplied by 1 will give you 1, which is also T. And if this is 1 and this is 0, so 1 multiplied by 0 will give you what? 0, which is F. So same thing applies here. So we have T and T. It becomes T, which is 1 times 1. Okay, we have 1 and 0. So it becomes false. We have false and this, which is 0 multiplied by 1. It becomes 0. So we have false and false, which is false. We have false and T, which is false. And we have false and false, which is false. Now, I said earlier that you can AND says the law for AND says what? The input, the output is true only when all the inputs are what? True. Now, you can also use the law of multiplication, where T is equal to 1, where T is equal to 1 and F is equal to 0. So when you multiply where t is 1 and t is 1. 1 times 1 will give you what? 1, which is also what? T. So you bring down t. Where you have t and f, which is 1 times 0, 1 multiplied by 0 will give you what? 0. 0, which is what? F. We just use the law of addition to solve this. Now, the law of or logic also says what? That the output is true when any of the inputs is true. The output is true only when any of the inputs is what? True. Now we have true here because this is true and true. We have true here, true here. Now, true or false, even when any of the inputs is true, then that definitely means the output will be true. Otherwise, false. Now, at the point where we don't have any of the inputs to be true, it becomes false. So either you use this law or you use the law of addition. Now, let's go to the next question, which says the negation of P or the negation of Q. Now, the negation of P. Now, note, this sign can also be used for negation. So it's either this or this. Don't be confused. When you see any of the symbols, just know it's asking for the negation of P. Now, we can't go directly to the negation of P or the negation of Q because we don't know the value of the negation of P and also the value of the negation of Q, which means we have to get the value first. So to do that, we get the negation of P. And remember, the negation of a statement means what? The negative or the opposite of that statement. Now, in a case where we have the negation of P, we have P to be here. So which means where P is true, the opposite of P or the negative of P or the negation of P becomes what? False. So where we have it to be true, it is false. Where we have it to be true, false. Where we have it to be true, false. At the point where we have it to be false, it becomes true. True, true, true. So it's just the opposite of P. Now, we also get the negation of Q, which is the opposite of what? Q. Q, at this point, the first input here says true. So the opposite becomes false. False. At the point where we have it to be false, it becomes what? True. It becomes true. So it's just the opposite. Where the opposite of true here becomes what? False. The opposite of true, false. The opposite of false becomes what? True. The opposite of false becomes what? True. So we have just succeeded in getting the negation of P and also the negation of Q. Now we can now answer this question, which is the negation of P or the negation of Q. Which means we are dealing, at this point, we are dealing with these two columns. The negation of P or the negation of Q. Now, remember, I said the law for all says what? That the output becomes true only when any of the inputs is what? True. Or you can also use the law of addition to solve that. Now, at this point, we don't have, none of the inputs is what? True. So the output definitely becomes what? False. Or using the law of addition. Remember, I said F, false, is equal to 0. So 0 plus 0 is what? 0, which definitely brings you down to false. So either you use the law of addition or you use the law of solving or logic. So false, false, false plus false is false. Now at this point, one of the inputs is what? True. So the output becomes true. One of the inputs is true, the output becomes true. One of the inputs is true, the output becomes true. One of the inputs, okay. So so we have just succeeded in doing what? Solving this last question. So remember, I said earlier, when you have a question like this, so you can't just dive into the question without getting the value of each of the variables that are to be used. Now see, at this point, we have the negation of P. That is why we had to get the negation of P and also the negation of Q. That is why we have to look for the negation of Q before we can now all these together to get this. Now let's look at the next question. Find P, Q, and R. Remember, I said the first step you have to take is to do what? Identify the variables we are dealing with. So we have P, we have Q, and we have R. You identify how many variables you are dealing with so that you know how many tables and how many columns you're going to have in your table. So we have P, Q, and R. So the next step is to do what? Get the truth table. They have three inputs. Remember, 8, 4, 2, 1. So we have 4, 2, 1. We have P, we have Q, and we have R. And remember, we are starting with T. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then we have 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So the next thing to do is to, just like in mathematics, looking at the question, the law of BODMAS says you take the bracket first, and also solving operators in computer, the precedence rule also says what? You take care of the bracket first. So we'll take this first expression, which is P or Q. P or Q. And remember, we said, or you can make use of what? The law of addition, or any of the output is true when any of the inputs is true. So P or Q, this is P or Q. So T is what? T, because any of the inputs is true. TT, any of the inputs is true. TF, yes, we still have one of the inputs to be true. Or you can say, remember, I said T is equal to 1 and false is equal to 0. So you can use the law of addition and say T1 F0. So 1 plus 0 is 1, which is also equal to what? T. This false and truth will give us truth. False and false, 0 plus 0 is 0. So false. False and truth will give us truth. False and false will give us false. Now we have taken care of the brackets. The next thing to do is to AND it with R. Next thing to do is to AND this with R. So picking this and R. So this column and this column. Now we have and. Remember, and I said you can make use of the law of multiplication. So let's make use of the law of multiplication. T multiplied by T will give us T. T multiplied by F will give us F. Where 1, T is 1 and F is 0. So 0 multiplied by 1 will give us what? 0, F. T multiplied by T, T. This multiplied by this, false. T multiplied by T, T. False multiplied by false, false. T multiplied by T, so false multiplied by false. So this becomes your value and this becomes your answer. Remember, I said when you have a question like this, you get the bracket first, you solve what you have in the bracket before you AND it with this. So it's more like this question is divided into two. You get this first before you AND it with whatsoever you have.